have such sights to show you.
We're Poppin the Scary horror podcast here. I'm your host Coale, and with me as always, I have my good friend and co-host Aaron. Aaron, you ready to go to the lake?
I love the lake.
The Lake of Mungo?
Yes, whatever is contained in Mungo Lake.
Oh yeah, I have no idea. I just know it comes from the land down under, you know, and I ain't talking about the Men at Work song,
True.
you know.
That is just a terrifying topic. An underexplored horror topic is just Australia. I mean, everything there wants to kill you.
I know, and they're still pretty happy from the most part.
Yeah, I know. So hopefully we'll see some. Well, I'm looking for some cassowary attacks. I'm looking for some dingoes. Spiders the size of my head. You know.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. This is another kind of
What the hell is this?
kind of thing, because I don't know anything about it. This just came at a recommendation from my friend Randy, where he said he really liked this film and everything, and I'm like, yeah, it's summertime. There's a lake.
Yeah,
That's summery.
that's a vibe.
You know, yeah, it's a vibe indeed. So I'm very sorry that there is nothing I could say besides that the film came out in 2008, supposedly.
Oh, suppose.
Yes, and this movie copy I'm watching is from Randy himself, which he apparently, now they're coming out with a 4K restoration of it, but before then it was only available in America in like those like horror movie collections, like 8 horror movies in one disc.
Oh yeah.
Sort of thing. So I don't think it's going to be terrible coming out of recommendation, but at the same point I'm also keeping expectations fairly minimal.
Sure.
Trying not to set the bar too high there.
Right.
But yeah, you know, so
Shout out to Randy.
yeah, just shout out to him and everything. that was so underly enthusiastic. Shout out to Randy. Yeah, so you folks don't go anywhere, because to Lake Mungo, we go. I thought of that at the very beginning, was holding on to it for the past 2 minutes.
Proud of you.
And we are back from watching Lake Mungo. Would you go there again?
To Lake Mungo? I mean, probably not. Didn't seem like a very exciting lake.
No, very much wasn't.
For it being the titular location, we really don't spend a lot of time at Lake Mungo, do we?
No, definitely like one of those things where it just, you know, it's talked about, but you get there and you're like,
yeah,
all right.
It was definitely more of a Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the screen moment. Like, as soon as they mentioned Lake Mungo, I was like, there it is.
Yeah. There's the title of the film. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I could say this with full hearty confidence. That seems like a film that my friend Randy would like.
But not a Coale film.
Not my general cup of tea, per se. But like I said, I don't claim to have a refined palate or whatever, something like that. But at the same point, I was just like watching it, and I was just like kind of waiting for like the gotcha.
Yeah.
There it clicks. There it clicks.
That's the twist, or there's the detail I needed. But this is definitely a slow burn. I hesitate to say mystery, but it is like a paranormal, like, what's going on here kind of mystery situation that just, is just maintains maybe the same pace throughout, which is slow and steady.
Very, very slow and steady, besides some of the camera shots, which fortunately, because this film has a lot of found footage stuff with the way it's being told, essentially. That there's not too much Cloverfield cam, which I hate. I always hate that jumbliness there. But yeah, I guess I'm going to have to dissect this myself, and this feeling I have toward this film being like, okay,
that's what the pod is about. We come fresh off the viewing, and we gotta. What do we feel?
Yeah.
What do we witness?
I don't know what to feel. It's not downright hate, but it's also not glowing. It's not, for me, I guess I'm not like filled with so much energy and stuff.
I feel it's not an
I don't know.
electrifying movie by any
means. And mind you, it's not the fact that if it's a slow movie I'm bored. It's the fact that, you know, I feel like if they're taking a lot of time, it being slow and
then
everything,
it needs to build up to something.
Yes, build up to something. And I felt like, did it build up to something? I guess, but it didn't feel like, okay, everything's clicking and stuff and everything else.
Well, for the folks at home, maybe we should give a little description of what this...
the plot. See, I'm lost in the soup right now.
In the sauce.
Yes, lost in the sauce. So basically, Lake Mungo focuses on the Palmer family, who during a vacation they took, I think they were on vacation, right?
Yeah.
They keep jumbling the timeline back and forth.
Right. Well, they were out. Yeah. They were out to the lake. I don't think the first lake was Lake Mungo, though.
Yes.
But they were out. They start out at a lake.
Not Mungo.
Not Mungo.
Yes, which threw me off.
They reference the dam, so it's a pool of water that they were swimming in, and it's sort of a documentary-esque film about. You know, from the beginning, the daughter is dead, and they're like, that's the first thing you learn, really.
Yes, you learn that the daughter, Alice Palmer, has gone missing, and whenever they find the body, they see that she was at the bottom of this lake, this body of water, essentially, and as they find out, they try to figure out exactly how this could have happened, but as they do, they start to realize... while trying to figure it out, they're also trying to cope with the loss of Alice, but learning that maybe she's not that far away. Ooh, man, look at that. A little thing.
Maybe she's just on the other side, looking in. A little paranormal, maybe? Oh, I don't know.
Yes, you said it way better than I did, dude. Plot-wise, I think it's a perfectly fine, great plot idea, essentially. Just focusing in on a family who lost their daughter, and they're trying to cope with it, while also trying to get to the bottom of what exactly happened. And... as Aaron mentioned earlier, it is shot more so like a documentary and everything, which I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting the way they set it up and everything else. But it's one of those things as well, like as it continues on or whatever, I felt like the trajectory of the story did develop, but by the time you got to the end, it's just sort of like, not quite the conclusion you're going to think it is, essentially. It's very like, okay, this goes on and boop, okay, you know, and so it's just sort of like, all right. And, you know, I don't mind stuff like that as long as it's enjoyable along the way. And while I wasn't bored per se, it was just more so like, okay, this is going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it tries to root itself as much as possible in realism and selling that documentary feeling, and in doing so, they try to not make anything too explicit, like, here's the ghost right in front of you, or whatever. So, you know, having that sort of, is this a real life thing that I'm watching attitude while you watch it is, maybe undersells some elements that could have been more exciting or more interesting.
Yeah.
Because it really is like, there's a blurry thing in the picture in the background. Is that a ghost?
Yeah, which, I could talk, like, I guess I've already talked about the plot and it's kind of difficult to do so. That's kind of the weird thing. It's a weird film to try to talk about.
Sure.
Because I do want to talk about aspects I did firmly like and I think are a strong attribute to this film that I do like. But I feel like we got to go through the normal motions. And while normally we would spend a lot of time dissecting the characters and everything, I find myself having trouble with this because, you know, whenever you watch like a movie, TV show, or even like a play or musical, something like that, whenever it comes to acting and stuff, I have come to point out stuff where it's like, oh man, that's good acting or bad acting, because I feel like there's like that sort of almost fantastical line with acting and stuff where, you know, it's more of like a heightened idea on how people respond to situations and everything else.
Right.
But because the performances in this film are supposed to be like it's real life, mundane, and it's shot exactly like a documentary you would see, I feel like you could talk about the characters, but I feel like you don't get to know about them too much besides like the way they're struggling and everything else. So I think for this film, the only characters I could maybe talk about is the Palmers directly, I feel like, because you spend the most time with them.
I think that's fair.
I
think it's really just the Palmers and then maybe Ray, but that's it.
Yes, and so we'll do the best and everything. I will say there wasn't a single actor I didn't believe wouldn't be in a documentary, so I mean, I guess that's probably a plus, right? That didn't stick out like a sore thumb, but I guess starting with one of the first dudes we see, which is Russell Palmer, the dad, played by David Pledger. Whenever it came to his character and sort of talking about the documentary stuff, I was very surprised with how muted the emotions were of the entire family, especially him. Like, he seemed to be the one like containing it in, but I know that there was like that portion of the video where it showed his coworker being like, yeah, he hasn't said nothing about it at all. You know, keeps it in. Kind of makes me worried.
Right.
I don't know why I'm throwing in the Aussie accent, but you know. And, you know, I do think it is kind of interesting, especially in comparison. Have you ever seen Twin Peaks?
Oh, I've seen like a couple episodes.
Yeah. I'm watching Twin Peaks right now with my wife, and that's the opposite, where it's overly emotional, overly over the top there. And then this is like a lot more muted and everything else, which I don't mind, but it is also kind of odd to see it play out there. Like, it almost felt like almost too emotionless. Like, I could sense that whenever he acted, like, he obviously was disturbed, but again, it's just like the way he talked about it. It's just like sort of like being approached by the news. Like, I heard your daughter die, except instead of showing any emotion, he's like, oh yeah, it was real crazy. Los Al's, we did. Something like that.
And I do think that is by design, but it's just, a question of how effective. Because I feel like it's trying to emulate those, like, true crime style, paranormal style TV documentaries that you would see, you know, in this era on the History Channel or whatever, and you know, sort of explore paranormal topics in a somber way, and so everybody talking is like, yeah, they lost a loved one, and they're talking in sort of like a straightforward to the camera kind of way. But you don't get to see how they actually are in real life or whatever.
Yeah, which I feel like, you know, it definitely is good for like the medium they're trying to do, but it also causes a sacrifice of knowing actually the characters, which I know it probably isn't a character piece. It's more about the mystery and everything else. But that's where I feel like the mystery overall, I think, was a little too mysterious there a little bit. And trust me, I know there's a lot of talk from a guy that loves Donnie Darko about just stuff they throw out that doesn't make any sense or you don't get concrete answers for. So I can't explain it, but
at least in a movie like that, I mean, you know, the details that get sprinkled in are more interesting, and the ways you can sort of piece them together have more impact on the story. Where this version, it's like, you could really tell the story without any of the paranormal stuff if you really wanted to.
Yes.
Like, they could have just been like, yeah, she died. What's up with that? And then, like, I don't know, like, it would have had the same exact vibe. Like,
oh my God, you are right. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, if you took away the paranormal aspect and just focus on how their lives have been and everything else, Yeah, I don't know. I felt like the paranormal factor didn't play quite as big of a thing. And I'll talk about more stuff in spoilers or whatever, but there's definitely some points where I was like, okay, it's going to turn a dime and become full horror movie.
Yeah.
But
I kind of had that feeling too. But,
I had that the entire time, just kind of waiting for something to click and
Right.
change gears or something like that. But as it was, essentially, they're just we're already getting off the character topic, or I'm getting off the character topic there, but David did a good job. I believed him as a dad who lost somebody very close to him, and he's trying to pull it together. Another one is his wife, June, played by Rosie Traynor, and I felt like she was, I don't know, also somebody that did exhibit a little bit more emotion about losing Alice a little bit there, but I honestly would argue it was the brother who looked the most messed up about it.
Right. Well, what was interesting about, I mean, like, June and the dad were both trying to, like, save face for, you know, people around them, I guess. But yeah, June's more upset, like, in the details, but whenever you actually see her character talking, she's very well put together and, like, calm and reasonable. It's just, like, whenever she describes some of the things she went through, it's like, yes, this person had more of an emotional reaction. But it is kind of the same thing where nobody's, like, breaking down on camera or anything. It's just like, she's like walking into people's houses.
Yes.
I wanted to feel like I was living someone else's life or whatever.
Yeah, doing something like that. I do like that it is through her grief that she does seek other stuff, because it seems like the father's coping mechanism is just get back to work and everything, which I can understand that. There's definitely been times where I've gone through a really hard part of my life, and I'm just like, just get me to work so that way I can just focus on that, essentially. So it is good seeing that, but yeah, again, it just sort of falls into the same thing where I can't say too much about the performance besides it's believable. She sounds exactly like someone that's being interviewed about losing their daughter and everything, and yeah. In all honesty, probably the character I had the most interest in was the son, Matthew, played by Martin Sharp, just because, again, like, I could tell that he was very disgruntled by it, but he was also socially awkward as all get out. Like, he definitely didn't... The actor was so good at almost seeming like socially, like, awkward, introverted, everything else. And so whenever he's being, like, interviewed, he's having to talk about something super difficult. And already I can't imagine he could talk, like, super calmly about stuff. Like, again, he likes to be the guy behind the camera because that's his hobby. And that's another thing that plays into a big factor of kind of the things I do like about this film, which is the filming aspect about it, which I'll talk about later. But I do find some of the decisions he makes a little bit questionable. A little bit. There's definitely some actions which I'm like, I don't know how much I buy. Like, that seems like something a normal person would do. But again, he's kind of awkward, introverted, could come up with something that most folks wouldn't think of. But at the same point, I did find his stuff fascinating, just kind of him anytime they interviewed him, and he was just very kind of like, I don't know, I'm just trying to make it through this. Like,
he was definitely one of the more active leaders of the story, I think, because he actually, like, did things like setting up the cameras and showing the photos and stuff. So I feel like he sort of put a little bit of agency into this film, which is otherwise kind of passive. Like, this happened, and then 8 weeks later, this happened, you know?
Yeah, doing something like that.
So
anyways.
I'm glad he injected, like, some action, I guess, as much action as this film has.
Yeah, and finally, like I said, even though there are a billion actors that pop up very briefly in the film that you can't really get a good consensus on, or didn't leave that big of an impact on me. The final one I guess we could talk about is the psychic that the mom calls up, Ray, played by Steve Jodrell. And I felt like he was good to bring in for the story, because for the most part, whenever it comes to the supernatural and everything else, it's usually kind of more common to see people be like, nah, that's just like fictitious fantasy stuff like that. But obviously there is a huge section of the population that does believe in ghosts, and especially seeing psychics. And bringing him in, he also was just a very grounded psychic compared to most, because anytime you see like a lot of psychics portrayed on TV, they're very eccentric out there, and he was just very grounded and kind of talked about things, and also not only was about the spirit, but also just was about interpreting dreams and everything, which does play a huge part in the film as it continues on. And I do think that I'm glad he was included, but at the same point, it was definitely kind of weird whenever it's like he's here, then he's not, then he's back again, then he's not, and then he back again. And so it was kind of like a bit of a back and forth and everything else, where I was like, okay, like, all right, I guess we're doing this, sort of thing. But yeah, like I said, that's pretty much the main characters I feel like I could even come up with like a somewhat big consensus on. I mean, they interviewed a lot of Alice's like friends,
the neighbors, just random people that have saw one thing or another,
and I do think they like, added to stuff, especially whenever it came to talking about like different aspects outside of the family itself, like people looking at the family from the outside, essentially, which helps kind of infer more information for the audience there, since again it is supposed to be sort of documentary found footage style film. And like I said, I would talk about Alice, but again, literally you only see her through like old recordings and stuff, and it seems
other
like
people talking about her.
Yes, and it just seems like, yep, she's fine, I guess. Like no diss on Talia Zucker. It's just the way the story is set up.
I thought she did a good job, like portraying a character with personality without having any lines or any like.
I would agree with that. Yeah,
she seemed like a kid, and then like as the story unfolds, and it's like, did she have secrets and stuff? It's she does a good job of sort of portraying like being a multifaceted person while only being captured in these like staged home video type things. So I would give her credit for that. But it is hard to have a lasting impact as a character when you don't have lines.
Yes, for sure. So no dissing at her or anything else. I felt like she did perfectly great and fine. Exactly same sentiments. Aaron has much better spoken than what I could, essentially. Talking about the film, I'm just gonna get out of the way and talk about the thing I really liked about this film, the one that I'm like, that was awesome, because it relates to me personally. And that was how crispy the digital footage was a lot of the time.
I like that a lot too. It is an era, that 2000s, early 2000s era of recording things on shitty camcorders with 1 hour battery life or whatever. Like, it's a vibe.
Yeah, because like I know there's always like the handheld footage stuff with like that grain and everything else, which I like perfectly fine and everything else, and they do use a film like that for some of the filming stuff, and especially seeing it be dark and you see sort of like that fuzz and everything definitely takes me way back, essentially. But the thing that really got to me was like there's a portion of the film where it's like cell phone footage and like really god awful recording equipment that took me to the early 2000s,
like Nokia cell phone footage.
Yes, like editing stuff, and I was just like, I never see this quality in a lot of films, essentially, and it's so cool to see them utilize that thing, because I do think there is I think they're smart, because with it being a horror film, although I would say it's more of a mystery than it is a horror film, just seeing like how blocky and creepy things could be, just sort of the distortion of it there is a bit of an unsettledness to it there, and I really like that. Anytime it showed the old kind of film in comparison to the documentary sort of professionally shot thing, I liked it. I really dug it a ton, and I was like, this is really cool idea.
I think the word that comes to mind for me is cryptic. It's really cryptic, and it's the same vibe you get from old alien and Bigfoot photos that you just can't reproduce these days, because everybody's camera has 4 million megapixels in it or whatever now. But yeah, that old blurry type footage that was just authentic from back in the day. That's how shitty our cameras were.
Yes, no, and it's so funny that is just a brief period in time of how god awful they were as technology tried to progress.
They were awful, but also accessible. It was a really short period of time.
Exactly, and I feel like just a film capitalizing on that era, essentially, there, which the film came out 2007 in Australia, 2008 here.
That was just...
So, it, like, literally, they weren't even like, oh, this is, like, so, like, retro. Like, that was just what they had at the time, but I feel like it's one of those things where it does, at least for me, age well in a weird sense, because it just captures it. And, you know, with Aaron and I both living through that era, I mean, that's what I got really endeared to. I was like, that's such a era, essentially. So I very much love Lake Mungo for that aspect there. And whenever it comes to things that I guess another thing I'll talk about that I did like is how the film deals with sort of ghost sightings and stuff. I felt like it was like definitely like I think they had the most fun with it in this film. I think in all honesty, that probably was the most satisfying thing, because basically, as it turns out, with like footage or pictures taken, there's like a brief picture of Alice herself there in the photo. And so then they're like thinking like, well, what does this mean? You know, and doing that stuff. And granted, other stuff is brought up about like why she's in some of the photos there. But I think that's kind of one of the more endearing factors, is sort of like spotting stuff in the background and everything else, like things you might miss. I think that's always like a very cool artistic thing a lot of films do whenever they keep things out of out of the camera, but not like in the like place where your eye is naturally going to drift to. Like it's literally like right on the offset there. So I enjoyed that aspect as well there, and especially whenever it came to the horror aspect, I felt like they very much were really trying to keep it as minute as possible.
Yeah, and I mean there are advantages to that. I think what this story was trying to do is really immerse you in a world that you would be convinced is real, you know, like I'm watching an old documentary, or at the time would have just been a regular documentary, about you know, like, oh, these people's lives, because they do the thing that was very popular in the early 2000s, this is a real story or whatever, and then at the end they're like, this was completely fictional. Anything that looked like a real person, don't sue us, please. But yeah, they do that shit. I mean, and that was super popular at the time. This is coming off the heels of Blair Witch Project, which came out in like '99. So this is like a few years after that. And then, you know, Fargo did the same thing where they were like, this is real, and then it wasn't real at all, you know, like just to like sort of make fun of that. But like a lot of films, especially scary films in the era, were like, this is a true story. And so I feel like that this is a good spin on like that true story, scary, paranormal type thing that I think was really popular at the time, and I assume was also popular in Australia. But of just being like, yeah, this is documentary footage of a real thing that happened to a real family, and so they want you to get immersed, and like the fact that this could be real is what the scary value comes from, rather than so I feel like that's why there wasn't a lot of overt like, and then the ghost walked right up to me and shook my hand and stabbed me in the neck or whatever. It was like, you know, I saw this thing, maybe what could it be, so that you could be creeped out, like, oh, I have a house too, what if there's ghosts in my house, you know.
Yeah, it's... I definitely think that is definitely one of the better strengths of the film. Like, while it is almost 10 years after sort of the found footage revolution, as it were, essentially, since it just blew up, essentially, I still feel like it also tries to be different enough there. So, yeah. I guess I could talk about aspects I didn't like, but like, here's the thing about Lake Mungo. There wasn't anything I directly hated about this film.
Yeah, it's not a supercharged film, so it's hard to feel very strongly about things one way or another, honestly, because it doesn't give you a whole lot to grip onto that's like, oh, this was really stupid, because everything they did was pretty grounded and rational, but at the same time, that also doesn't give you a lot to be like, I loved this, you know?
Yeah, and so that's like, the thing is, like, they would throw stuff, like, in the film that I'm like, oh, this is a big key point. How's that going to change the story?
There were some red herrings, yeah, for
yes,
sure.
doing that, and so then I'm like, oh, that's going to lead to something, and then, no, it's just, it's nothing. It's just something that happened. And by the point they even get to Lake Mungo and stuff, because as they flip through her diary and stuff, they find stuff about it, and they're like, oh yeah, she went to a trip to Lake Mungo, which again threw me through a loop, because I thought that body of water on the trip they talked about was Lake Mungo, but
that might have been intentional. You think that was Lake Mungo the whole time, but then Lake Mungo was a separate thing.
Yeah, which is not even a lake.
Right, which I thought was supposed to be the big twist, but then even there wasn't. I mean, I guess there was, but nothing that really shat my pants.
That's exactly it. Like, it's like whenever they're like, talking about like, oh, it's at Lake Mungo and everything, I'm expecting a build up there.
New information injected into this, because it does follow like a chronological.
Yeah, which we won't spoil it. Again, it's kind of like a weird film where it's like you can't spoil it there. It's just following through the motions, but that was just one of the things. I felt like the ultimate payoff at the end was, I wouldn't say it wasn't worth the price of admission, but it was just sort of like, okay, like anytime I felt like it was escalating to something, it just didn't lead to anything there.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I feel like this movie is just trying to edge you.
Yeah, I would agree.
This is the edging equivalent of horror. It's like just trying to get you in a spooky state for the hour or two you're watching it, and then lets you go.
And trust me, I give credit to Lake Mungo, because they could have, I was thinking it was going to take some cheap shots or whatever, but I felt like it never did.
Yeah.
It never did. It might have thrown red herrings, but it wasn't cheap shots where I'm like, okay.
Absolutely. And I feel like the film, like that, they were kind of playing it safe with that a little bit, and I respect that, but I also, without taking that risk, this film isn't getting anywhere near the 10 area of the scale.
I'm just going to give a heads up. Me too, bud.
Yeah. but it does, without that risk, there's not the reward, but, without the risk, there's also not the chance that they do some jump scare, woo, bloody ghost face, and then you're like, wow, that was fucking stupid, but which could have totally tanked the film. So overall, I'm left feeling at the end of it, good, but in like a lukewarm sense for me.
I think that's totally fair. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what the hell else to talk about without spoiling stuff.
There's definitely, because a lot of it's just details I want to go into that we can't talk about in the non-spoiler section.
So let's just get to ratings already.
Yeah.
As you can tell, I am like hyped and charged and excited.
Let's do it.
Yes.
Okay, so I think this is a very unique entry, at least so far in what we've watched on the podcast. We have not watched anything quite like this. I've definitely seen things that have emulated the style, like the mockumentary, you're trying, but yeah, I do feel like this fits a very particular niche where if you want to dive into that world and experience what this family experienced for 2 hours and then kind of think about it a little bit afterwards, it's a good film. Is it one that you should watch with a group of people if you're trying to have a good time? Probably not. Yeah, this is something you watch with your significant other, or if you're bored at 2 a.m. on a Saturday and you're like, let's watch a kind of spooky film. That being said, yeah, nothing mind-blowing about it, but nothing that really tanks it either. I'd say this is like a 6, because what they were going for, they executed well. It's just what they were going for never is going to really blow anybody's brains out. There's nothing about it that's going to make me think about this film for a very long time afterwards. There's nothing about it that is particularly super memorable, but it is a neat little, I don't know, just snapshot into time. I feel like it has aged incredibly well, actually, because it does perfectly encapsulate that mid-2000s video era and like interesting paranormal era, and so I give it a lot of points for the vibes. But besides the vibes, there's really not a whole lot to champion about this film. I feel like the mystery is interesting to think about, but the film doesn't give you a whole lot besides just a nugget to plant in your brain. And so overall, it's like a 6 for me.
That's going to be generous compared to what I give it. That's all. Like, here's my thing about it. Like, whenever it came to watching this film, and I was like, okay, it's a found footage film or whatever, and then I'm just buckled in and everything, and I'm just waiting for things to click. Or even if they don't click, the things that don't click are at least interesting and stuff. Because mind you, I love stuff that's abstract, like Twin Peaks, Donnie Darko, where they just do weird stuff, be it stuff they talk about, do whatever. So trust me, I think with this genre is just sort of hit or miss there. And while I do admire the fact that this is a perfect encapsulation, especially of video capturing footage of the mid 2000s, I don't feel like that's a strong enough thing for me to revisit this film. Like, that would about to be the only thing I would see. That, and just all the times that you did see a glimpse of the ghost, maybe, essentially. Yeah. Because the characters aren't strong enough to where I'm like, oh man, I love this character, I want to revisit this character. Right. Or like, oh, the story's so great. It's just very kind of a little underwhelming for me overall and everything else. And there was times that I was clocking out mentally. Like, I was like, okay, just going through the motions there and everything else. But at the same point, it didn't do anything offensive where I'm just like, oh God, this is awful or stupid or bad. It was just sort of like, okay, just like doing that. So I think because of that, my rating is probably going to be around a 4.5. I feel like a 4 is too harsh on it. 5 though is like, it's okay, it's okay. This is like a little below okay for me. And again, I think the biggest flaw it has is that I feel like they just kind of almost played it too safe, like you mentioned there. And like, while I respect the decision of holding punches there, I just felt like there should have been at least something. And I felt like the closest I got to is whenever they get to Lake Mungo and they have that thing occur, that I was like, okay. But even then, it was just sort of like, instead of like a sucker punch, it just sort of was like a slight slap on the wrist, essentially there, like oh, there it is. But yeah, like, do I see why my friend Randy would like it? Absolutely. Like, especially because he loves sort of like the SCP sort of like files, stuff like that. And like, I know there's like a big popular thing on YouTube, like, I forget, it's like called Hornet's Nest, something like that, where it was a lot of early YouTube found footage films that people assembled together to make it like a creepypasta, essentially.
I love that kind of
stuff. Yes.
Like,
so,
Atrocity Guide.
Yes.
That kind of the long form documentaries about things that are kind of spooky.
Yeah. Stuff like that. But just for me, this one was just a swing and a miss and stuff. Like, great swing, just didn't hit me, essentially. So I think if you're wanting to see a film that perfectly kind of captures that sense of like the mid 2000s recording footage and stuff, I think it's on Amazon. You could check it out and everything else. For me, this is probably some dude who won't be touring Lake Mungo anytime soon. All my fucking pizzazz and charisma has died out, where I'm just like, usually like, oh man, that backflip was awesome, and now I'm just like, yep, this was okay.
Yeah, well, it's kind of that film. It's a very subtle, very subdued film by design. I feel like it executes it well, but yeah, I think we agree that it doesn't. By doing that, it really hasn't given us anything to come back and be like, whoa, this thing happened. You know?
Doing something like that. Oh man, let's talk about spoilers, man. I'm just going to get to it. Please take it away.
Yeah, so I guess we'll do it chronologically. I think it's interesting the film opens with her talking to who we later find out is Ray, who she's doing the interview. and she's talking about how something bad has. She's like, I feel like something bad's gonna happen, or that it's already happened and it's waiting to catch up with me, which ends up being the core of like the mystery later and what gets unveiled at Lake Mungo. Is that she finds out that she's actually been visiting Ray for a while to like interpret her dreams, and this bad thing that she thinks is gonna happen, that is gonna eventually find her, which sort of sprinkles in what I think is the most interesting and mysterious part about this, which is the core mystery, which seems to be that Alice has had some sort of premonitions for the future, that she knows that her death is coming, and that she also has some sort of other limited access into things that are going to happen in the future, which she finds out by encountering her own ghost later, but then also seeing the spirit of her mother while she's in these sessions with Ray, when her mother doesn't come to do the second part of that until months after her death. So, I mean, interesting that it starts there. That like, you know, there's this foreboding sense that something's coming, and it starts to build the sort of anticipation. And I was kind of excited for where the film was going to go from there, but it does sort of peter out after in general. But did you pick up on the fact that the beginning opening credits or whatever was her interview later with Ray, or?
I did not pick up that and everything. I only picked it up whenever they started showing the recording of Alice and the recording of the mother there, essentially, that it was tied together.
Yeah,
I didn't pick up on that.
I didn't know it was tied together either until they put them side by side, but
God knows I didn't catch on to that and everything else, which I thought, in all honesty, like by that point, it was going to reveal something grander or greater, like a big revolution, like sort of like that aha moment and everything. And it was just like,
Right. I think this film is more like there are little aha moments, because as I think about it and as we talk about it afterwards, I'm like, oh yeah, this is what was happening. And it's sort of one of those films where you watch the whole thing and then you have to think about what they gave you. Because like I'm thinking about now. So I know we're jumping around the timeline a little bit.
Yeah, we're going to have to.
But there's a part in the film where first you find out that the dad went up to Alice's room and sat in the wicker chair, and then Alice walks in, and this is after her death or whatever, and he's like terrified. He sees Alice's ghost, and she's like working at the little desk or whatever, and he says he's sitting in her wicker chair. I don't know what made me sit about it. When did I say I sat in her wicker chair? And then I must have made a noise or something, because she turns around, and she comes at me, and he's like, get out of my room, and he leaves, or whatever. Which, that was honestly probably one of the biggest turning points in the film. I was like, oh yeah, because that was right after they discovered Matthew has bruises all over his body, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, so not only is there a ghost, it's a vengeful spirit, and it's going to start doing bad things to them. Little did I know that was the most bad thing that happened. And nothing more interesting happened beyond that, which was a bummer, but...
Man, I forgot about the bruises as well.
Because after it's revealed that Matthew doctored the ghost footages, I was like, those are the only two pieces of evidence left in my brain. Was like, okay, there's bruises on his body, and the dad saw a ghost, and then the mom was having bad dreams. But you can kind of like chalk that up to bad dreams or whatever. But then, of course, even that's revealed later. But stay on topic for a second. One of the most interesting things that pieced together in my mind, only after the film, that the film just gives you enough nuggets to connect the dot yourself, but doesn't explicitly say, is, Dad's sitting in the chair, that whole thing happens. Later on, when they review the footage that Matthew faked where he's walking in, they see that there was a picture of somebody in the chair from the footage that they filmed that night. Is the same wicker chair that the dad went and sat in. And it was the neighbor that it turns out that Allison had like a weird affair with, that because he was the babysitter and she like got groomed or something. I don't know, but there was like a weird situation with that. And so, like piecing that together later, it's like, okay, the ghost of Allison maybe was coming in to like yell at the neighbor who was sitting in the chair or whatever, like because she's and also that chair is like right in front of the place where she hid the videotape or whatever. So like there's little details like that I'm like, oh, does the film want me to think like, oh, because we're jumping around in time and whatnot, that like Allison wasn't really saying that to her dad, but saying that upon seeing her neighbor sneak into her house or whatever. Like just little things like that where I'm like, oh, is that why or whatever, you know, like the dreams that the mother has where the daughter is at her bed and like not saying anything turns out later to be, okay, well, the daughter was channeling her spirit earlier and walking into the room and walking to the end of the bed and saying and also that her daughter had previously, before she died, had walked to the end of the bed while her parents were sleeping and wanted to tell her something but just couldn't because it was too painful, and realized that she had to deal with this shit herself or whatever before going to Lake Mungo. So there's all these little elements of time that these things have happened in Allison's life at previous points, and then they catch up later. That's the whole sort of timey-wimey mystery of the film, is okay, well, the things that Allison is experiencing and Allison's ghosts are experiencing might be in different pieces of time in her mind than it is in the world that the family is living in. So
yeah, I think the time aspect is definitely sort of bizarre because I guess taking everything which in all honesty, I'm glad you're able to spearhead this because
just vomiting out stuff.
I mean, yeah. I'm glad you are, because in all honesty, I can't even get myself to say anything about it. It is odd because one of the big aha moments is, like I said earlier, was how they start comparing the recorded footage that the psychic had of Alice talking about her dream, correlating exactly months later to the mother sort of mentally going through her mind into the house there, and they literally overlap with one another, which I'm sure the mother had no knowledge of the videotape knowledge, because again, it's sort of confidential sort of stuff like that or whatever. And there's stuff like that, and then there's the chair thing you mentioned, which I totally forgot about, the dad going through that and everything else. But I thought it was just something mimicking the footage that was recorded of somebody recording Alice saying, what are you doing? Get out of my room, because she was working on something. So was it the neighbor that she was sleeping with, the one recording that footage there? Because that was that I didn't know if it was that, or if it was I've assumed it was one of the family members recording it.
I think that
and
was
everything.
Matthew, because Matthew said he had a lot of recordings of his sister, and that's how he was using them to manipulate the footage.
Yeah, because that whole neighbor thing was such a weird thing to throw in there. It
was something they set up, but it was an interesting weird twist, because they said at the beginning they were they showed a piece of the interview that they then showed again later of one of Alice's friends being she was a person that held secrets, and was a person that held the fact that she held secret, and it was only that came up later, and you find out that was the secret that she was holding on to, was that she was having an affair, seemingly consensual, but still weird, with the family of whom she was babysitting.
Yeah, it was just sort of a weird thing, and not to mention, it's they're we saw he was in the house. We don't know why he was there. We're not going to press it further. We're just going to be that's weird. He was in our house.
Well, no, the mom is I knew why she was in the house, because he was trying to find that videotape that they made that was incriminating that they had an affair. Yeah.
I just felt they highly underplayed someone breaking into their house very low.
And just found it on this, just his face on this footage. What I also think is interesting talking about it just now is that they never found that guy.
No.
So, was he a ghost too?
Because it's like the movie Ghost.
The movie Ghost. Because with Patrick Swayze.
Yeah, they have ghost sex.
Yeah.
Anyways,
at the pottery wheel.
Yes.
No, I mean maybe, but that's what this kind of movie does. Is it throws you all these little details, and it's this could be it, because they never did find the guy, even though it seemed because the police officer was saying we haven't found him. Obviously, if we found him, the first thing we would do is tell the family. But we had some leads and it looked promising, and then they all went dry. And even if we did find this guy, looking at the evidence, we probably wouldn't have enough to convict him, because it looked like it was consensual.
Yeah.
So I guess besides the shame and embarrassment, there was no reason for this neighbor to flee completely from the law or whatever.
Yeah.
So which makes it think did he also die?
Yeah, they don't bring him up at all and everything. So that was like one of the weird things. Like whenever they brought it up, I'm like, oh, aha, now we're getting into
now
this.
we're cooking.
Yeah, now we're cooking, and then they just turned the stove off.
Yeah, I think all it was supposed to do is like maybe give a motivation as to why Allison might have killed herself, because we never find out how she died.
Yeah,
Just
that is weird.
She disappears and then is found in the lake. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not the lake, I guess, but in the water.
Yeah, like, and that,
which is strange.
That kind of pisses me off. Now that I think of it, that
they never determine a cause of death. They never talk about that shit. They talk about the autopsy, but they're just like, yeah, she was found in the lake, I guess.
Yeah,
but, where you're supposed to piece that in later is that this ghost of the future caught up with her and killed her, I think, because what they find on the footage of her cell phone that they found that she buried with a lot of her other personal belongings is this footage of her walking, with the line of a camera on or whatever, and then a ghost of her that looks like her drowned body in the future, like jump scares her basically. Yeah. And then all that's left on her cell phone footage that we see is her burying her belongings. So there's like, and then, they splice that in with her interview with Ray where she's talking about, again, the clips that they showed in the beginning of the movie to sort of set it up, where she's like, I had the feeling that something bad happened, that already happened and was just catching up with me. And that's like where she saw, like, she died, but she hasn't died yet. Like, she saw her own ghost, and that convinced her that, like, I'm going to die soon. And then she does.
Yeah, and I don't mind like her running into the ghost thing or whatever, but that's about the only jump scare, if any, you really see in the film, because they do show some of the ghost in the footage there, but that was about the only one, which again, that's probably one of the most memorable moments from this film.
I think that's supposed to be the big turning point.
And I thought it was like, okay, but it's just sort of like weird. Like, I don't know if they're trying to go into like symbolic or something, like the sort of guilt or something.
I think they were trying to do the thing where the audience is supposed to be scared, terrified by the idea, the concept. You know what I mean? So much so that the film doesn't have to explore it further. Which because like it's almost like the documentary misses the point. They're like, we're just showing you the evidence. There was a weird ghost thing here. But they don't really follow up on what is supposed to be the most terrifying part of this movie, I think, which is that the concept that some people just see their ghosts in the future. Some people are connected to the future so much so that they are going to die. Like, she starts going to Ray because she has these dreams that she's going to die, and she's like, "Are you scared of death?" And she's like, "Isn't everybody?" or whatever. So the concept, I think, is that to imagine yourself wandering in the dark and encountering a ghost of yourself, of your dead corpse in the future, and then suddenly, you become possessed, and you are like, well, I'm going to die soon, and you start making your own funeral arrangements. You bury your belongings as like a ritual, like, myself has died. And then, like, is she possessed? Was she cursed? These things we don't know because the film doesn't have any evidence for that, and so they just completely omit it. But they sort of, like, tease the idea. Like, it seems very, and I know this is biased because I just started reading a bunch of Junji Ito things, but it's very Junji Ito, where like all these like it's like a folk story of like, all right, somebody became cursed one day and then they just fucking killed themselves. That's like every Junji Ito story, like just with some funny details thrown in. This one is that she drowned or whatever instead of squeezing through a cliff with a hole made just for you, or that's a great one. You should read that. That's the one that got me started. The curiosity of something fault. It's like this earthquake happens and this sheet of earth opens and it just has human-shaped holes in it, and people are locked into it because they're like, this is weird. And then they're like, this hole's made for me. And they're like, what are you talking about? And they're just possessed with the idea that they have to go through it. And then, but it's only big enough that they can squeeze through it, and they can't get back out. And then they like just keep walking into this hole and die. But anyway. It's like just crazy concept, but it's like a concept like that. It's like, okay, you see this spirit and you're just possessed with the fact that you are cursed and you're going to die, and then you drown yourself or whatever. Like, that's a scary concept, but the movie doesn't quite inject the full concept into you. It just gives you the evidence for you to think that thought and then carry it your own way. And I think that's what the whole movie's trying to do, and whether or not it gives enough to really get under your skin is up for debate.
Yeah, because, like, again, like, by that point, even though it's a jump scare, it's not even really, like, the classic horror jump scare that we're used to. And I honestly thought that the film was going to end with a jump scare, sort of like, this is sort of like the, you know, pop goes the weasel moment, essentially, like, popping out, but there wasn't. And I'm glad they didn't do that, because that would have been stupid. But I was waiting for, like, something. And it was another thing that they kind of threw in that I was sort of like, I guess I get it, but why? Is with the brother. As much as I like him, whenever they're talking about the footage, like, he's like, yeah, I took, like, this photo and footage, and I just found these recordings and stuff. And then he talks about it later. He's like, oh, yeah, I took a picture of her and put it in this photo, and I turned the mirror towards a TV and recorded it. And I guess, like, his reasoning was he wanted to make them feel like she was still here somehow. Yeah. Like, and I get it, but at the same point,
it's one of those things. It was very deflating halfway through the film to see that, like, this cool paranormal stuff that we've seen so far was just faked, you know? It was a little, like, but I also get it. I feel like I do understand his motivations as, like, not only that, but also there was evidence that they sort of glaze over after that point that there was a ghost in the house.
That's what I was thinking too.
Because they're talking about how there are noises in the house. They're talking about the mother having the bad dreams. Matthew experiences these bruises on his body, and the dad literally sees the ghost in her room and is, like, shouted to get out. So all of these people have experienced paranormal stuff, and so I think he just really wanted to see her ghost in the images. So he started to make that a reality, and that was his sort of weird grief process. And, you know, the mom says, like, I don't really know his full motivations, and he kind of explains, like, yeah, I just, like, you know, wanted her to, like, give hope, I guess, to the mom. And even though he admits that he kind of made it worse, I think it's supposed to, like, keep the film from feeling too ghostly too early on for it to still feel like a real documentary, like, okay, well, this is how these things happened. And it's sort of deflating for the audience, but at the same time, if you remember all the details, you're like, well, there's still more to it because these other things are unexplained, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I guess one of the other points I will talk about is I don't know. I guess the ending's about the only thing I could think of anything concretely to say, because towards the end of the film, you know, after they visit Lake Mungo, find the footage, everything else, and they still don't have a definitive answer. It shows them, like, moving the house or whatever, and they've decided they're able to move on, because with Alice's room, they didn't touch it at all, which makes sense. You just kind of want to leave it as is there, essentially. And they leave or whatever, and I guess they take, like, one final photo in front of the house, and then they have, like, the gotcha moment as they slowly zoom into the window, showing Alice, because Alice's dream correlated exactly to what she was saying, like, everybody, they forgot about me, or whatever, which I felt like it should have been a more powerful gotcha moment, or like, oh my gosh, or something. But zooming in, and whenever it cut to credits, I instinctively went, really? I was just like, you know, I didn't hate it, but it was just like, okay, like, there's no, like, ultimate, wow.
And I do think, even though they're going for Sedude, I do think they wanted that to have more impact than it did. But,
and, you know, it's like, I know it's like, oh, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
Right.
And it's like, sure, but the journey itself was just okay.
Right.
And everything.
And if you look at the clues of how the film laid it out, I mean, by that point, they were like, okay, you know, Allison really wanted to tell us something, and it was all these secrets that she held. And once we found all that out, we quit seeing Alice, because there was months and they quit seeing anything. And then they show, even when they're doing the juxtaposition of Alice's interview with Ray and June's interview with Ray and how they line up perfectly, June's is about months later. It's her final consultation with Ray, it says, is about how she walks into the room and she's not there, I don't see her, and she leaves. And Alice's interview is about my mom doesn't see me in the room, and I'm still here. And so it is sort of like the family has moved on. They've quit seeing Alice, but Alice is still there. Her ghost is still there, even though they've quit seeing it. And so that's kind of what the zoom in is. And I think that's supposed to be like a whoa moment to some degree, but it just, it does kind of fall flat a little bit because of how subtle it is.
Well, the way you described it sounds a hell of a lot better than what I experienced.
Right, yes. Yeah. And that's the film's problem is I feel like it holds back its punches too much. Like, I feel like it didn't want to be ham-fisted, so it's like trying to be as subtle as possible, but it also just sort of missed the mark in the other direction by not hitting it hard enough. Yeah,
because I didn't interpret it that way. Like, it's just her being sad about, like, just being left behind and forgotten. It's sort of, I guess, a big metaphor for sort of mourning and stuff, that there are different ways to look at it.
That's a good way to look at it. But I also think it ties into the mystery of her sort of being displaced in time before she ever dies.
Yeah.
Like, are we to believe that maybe she killed herself, not just because she sees this image of her own ghost when she's at Lake Mungo or whatever, but also because she feels like she's been abandoned by her family? There's this whole arc in there about how June and her mother are so much alike, but they don't get along at all. And how June, why she felt, so part of the reason she felt so much guilt after her daughter's death is because she felt like she maybe didn't know that she loved her and that she knew she was there and all this stuff. So it's one of those situations where, because of their behavior in the future where they quit seeing the ghost, is that why Alice killed herself? Because she was feeling these feelings that she was abandoned from the future and she's not even there yet. You know what I mean? It's one of those, like, I think the whole mind-blowing thing you're supposed to think about is like, what the fuck was up with Alice, this character that we don't ever get to talk to directly, but see only in clips and hear explained by third parties, who has this change of attitude while she's still alive and then dies. And it's like, okay, this can be explained by her weird trauma thing with the babysitter family. But, like, it can also be explained by she is experiencing the future, and she starts feeling so lonely because she's experiencing a future where she's already dead.
You know, and it is funny that you bring up these points and stuff, because I didn't really even think about it that way, because again, they're just because of the way they're shooting the film and everything else, it doesn't give you time to really absorb that. It's like you have to literally just infer it from that and everything else. It just
lays out breadcrumbs, and then you gotta follow them if you want to.
You know, and so I feel like, you know, while this is a very much an unfair comparison, mind you, I'm not saying like, why couldn't they do this, since what I'm about to compare it to is like a TV show essentially, but like the Haunting of Hill House, I felt like tackled the idea of like mourning a bit better. Granted, they had hours and hours and hours to do it, so it's unfair, but yeah, like, I don't know. I guess I just wish I would have picked up on a lot more of that feeling there.
Right. And there are other, like, feature films that have dealt with similar topics in ways that are much more interesting. Sixth Sense comes to mind. A paranormal, big twist-driven movie that, you know, shows you enough paranormal stuff and still feels realistic and scary at the same time. Obviously, this is going for a completely different vibe, but I feel like there are ways to accomplish what this film was trying to accomplish in a much more direct way. But I just don't think the film was trying to be direct at all.
Yeah, I think in all honesty, like, if anything, like, maybe have like the son record an organic conversation between the mother and father there, essentially. Maybe like dealing with like a loss or something like that. Maybe something to infer a little more humanity into it. But I think they were just ride or die with a documentary style.
Right. And I feel like you could be ride or die with the documentary style, but then feel that the documentary was more skeptical of the family. Like, it felt like it was just for the family, but it wasn't.
Yes.
Like, and if you had that, because you've already, I like where you're going with this, because you already established that the son is like a big into films and was filming everything all the time. If you had some of those more genuine moments where the mom and the daughter were fighting, or where, you know, if you could inject some more realistic humanity rather than just, this is the face I'm putting on for the documentary. And the documentary could be a little more critical and zoom in a little bit more ways of what's going on. Maybe there's some footage, some suspicious footage of her over at the neighbor's house that you're like, you know, that could really settle this stuff in. But they chose not to go that route, which is interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I will mention one thing that the film does, which I'm very hit or miss on because I feel like a YouTube video would do this anyways. But at the end of the film, after they show the picture, they go back to some of the video capture or the pictures, and they actually show how Alice was actually in the photo. Even like in photos that he edited, Alice was somewhere else there, which I was like, that's kind of cool, essentially, like seeing something that you didn't see initially there. Right. I think that's why there's such a fascination with paranormal stuff, with seeing stuff in video or photos, and you're like, what's that, or whatever. So I enjoyed that aspect a lot there, and just pointing it out, because like I said, there'd be times they would focus like, we saw a figure back there, but then they literally show footage that they didn't talk about, or they're like, oh, we didn't see Alice, and then Alice is right there.
And they didn't even show all of it, because I remember specifically one scene where when they had the 3 cameras set up and they were just shooting the house for all hours of the night. I remember specifically they had one where you could see a figure in the far left corner, but they didn't zoom in on it at all or anything. They weren't like, here's the figure. They were just showing it, and I was like, oh. And there were several of those things that I feel like didn't make the end credits, where they did slip in Allison in these otherwise mundane shots. That it's just like a little Easter egg for the audience if you did see it, to be like, oh wait, there she is.
Yeah, which I think does merit like a rewatch, and because you know what to look for, since before you don't know what to look for. So while I don't think I'd go back and revisit it solely for that, it is cool that they made a film like that. That is like, oh, it was there the entire time, you just missed it.
Right.
And I feel like that also could be, I don't know, you're getting me on the whole freaking metaphor, symbology, simile, whatever thing, where it's like, just like looking past things that are there, essentially. So that's Lake Mungo, huh?
I guess so.
Anything else you want to add to it?
The one thought I just had,
go ahead,
is there is a line in there about how in the culture that Ray's from, I forget where he says he's from, because he seems pretty Aussie to me. But wherever Ray's from, he says, like, my culture back home, when people would die, like when they're experiencing grief, they would cover all the mirrors in the house to keep the dead from coming back in or whatever. And so, but he was talking about it as like a throwaway line to be like, people grieve their own way or whatever. But I did think it was interesting that, they show this reflection of Allison in the mirror, or the reflection of fear, and it turns out to be staged, where he was using the mirrors to show the TV or whatever. But what's interesting now that I'm thinking about it is how cameras work is with a mirror. And so when he was taking these photos or whatever, like maybe that was supposed to be, or even when she was recording on her phone and sees this ghost, the use of the mirror, a camera mirror, to create these images is what allowed the ghosts to come forward in the first place.
Nice, very spooky.
That's my little ding 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 moment.
And I like that. I like that a lot there. Just kind of explains how you're not able to see stuff, and maybe Alice was only able to see it through the camera phone, essentially, there, because it's dark outside. She's trying to look through, and it illuminates stuff. So yeah, I like that. I like how you mentioned that line. I totally missed that and totally went over my head.
Yeah, but anyway, that's my final takeaway thought. I do think, now that we've talked about this further, there are things to sit and think about with this film, which is probably its biggest strength of the mystery. But yeah, overall, it didn't explode my mind.
Okay, well, no worries. It didn't explode my mind either. Now you could have used more explosions, like Scream 3 explosions. Yeah. So how about we talk about the next film we're going to watch, which I have a good feeling it's going to be a complete opposite trajectory of this.
Okay.
I have not seen this film, but it is a sequel.
Okay.
To a slasher franchise.
Great.
Released in 1990.
Okay.
And the main slashers line, whenever they're feigning innocent, is, "Hi, I'm blank. Wanna play?"
Chucky?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Chucky. Did we watch the second one?
We did not watch the second one.
We
We only watched the first one.
Okay, so
yeah,
Chucky
I
2.
know. I was like thinking about it. I'm like, how have we not watched the second one? Because you enjoyed that one quite a bit there. So yeah. Chucky's I'll just use a tagline from the poster here. Sorry, Jack. Chucky's back. I don't know who Jack is, but
Child's Play 2.
Yes, exactly. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. We'll see y'all again next time when we're Poppin the Scary with Child's Play 2.
Yeah.
Wow, that was very quiet. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, Castbox, or iTunes platforms to stay up to date when new episodes drop. To see what Aaron and I are up to, check out our respective Twitter accounts. For me, it is @ColeKirkVA, and for Aaron, it is @AnimalGameDev. Thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We'll speak to you all again next time when we're Poppin the Scary.